Hey MCARBO brother, I'm Chris Nelson, President of MCARBO. Really excited to finally introduce a new KSG target trigger, aluminum trigger for your KSG Shotgun, and a 50% trigger pull reduction in our new KSG Trigger Spring Kit. Really fantastic combination. This video we're gonna do both at the same time, unlike other videos we've done in the past, like for the sub. This is all in one, really a night and day effect. A fantastic improvement. Allows you to also dial in that pre-travel. There is absolutely no pre-travel in this trigger now. Really fantastic. If you check the plastic trigger, you'll notice too, there's seam lines from the factory on that plastic trigger. It's molded. Now this is aircraft grade machined aluminum trigger. Just beautiful. Really contour, nice curvature. It feels solid too when you're pulling that trigger. No longer does it feel like a plastic kind of toy trigger. This is a real fantastic improvement. Can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. Let's get on over to tabletop, put this baby in. Let's go ahead and check our shotguns together, make sure they're clear. Check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine tubes. The shotgun's clear. Before we get started, let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 7 pounds, 0.9 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. £7 pounds, 3.7 ounces. Parts and tools needed for this build: KEL-TEC KSG Target Trigger by MCARBO, KEL-TEC KSG Trigger Spring Kit by MCARBO, synthetic grease with PTFE, 2.5mm Allen key or a T-handle wrench like you see here, 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/8 inch punch, your bench block, needle nose pliers, a hammer. It's recommended to have a flashlight, and as always guys, make sure you're wearing eye pro. So the major benefit to what we're about to do here is we're going to put in a nice aluminum trigger to replace this plastic trigger here. Now the plastic trigger on the KSG doesn't flex like it does on the sub. It's pretty solid, but it does have a parting line in the middle where it is molded plastic, so they just make these things, you know, crank them out in molds. You can kind of feel it, it's sharp. So if anything, you're definitely going to need to sand this down if you decide to keep it, but I would advise against keeping it. Now if you look, that's all pre-travel. That is a ton of pre-travel. It's just all day long, man. Amazing. Alright, so that's what exists before you finally complete that trigger pull. Now the cool thing about what we're going to do here is this is a nice 6061 aircraft grade aluminum replacement. Alright, it's even skeletonized, it's lightweight, feels amazing, and it's got a set screw in here that will allow you to adjust the pre-travel, which is fantastic. One of the primary benefits of this replacement trigger right here. Eliminates the pre-travel. Then we've got synthetic grease to help reduce the trigger pull further. We're going to put that between the Sear engagement surface on the trigger. You'll see that here in a second. And then the actual trigger spring kit to reduce the trigger pull. So we should get a nice trigger pull reduction, a nice smooth feeling, clean, crisp trigger at the end of it. Really fantastic, really impressed with it. Let's go ahead and pop it open and take a close look at it. There it is, just a beautifully machined part. Really love this trigger. This has been in the making for such a long time. I'm really happy and excited to see it finally getting released. We're really impressed. We had to really perfect it, took some time, ton of revisions, but we got it exactly the way we wanted it. Nice smooth radiuses all along the side, just a beautiful trigger. Even made it slightly longer. It is a completely custom designed trigger to this KSG. We left out no detail. We really went above and beyond with this one. I mean, I thought this is going to be a more expensive trigger than usual because there are a little bit more complicated pieces, you know, features to this actual trigger itself. So the geometry made it a little challenge, not to mention the set screw and everything else, but man, we hit our target and we really did a great job just cranking these babies out. So I'm really impressed with all the guys down at the shop, you know, Kyle and Chad and everybody else that really made this thing work, man. It's been a long time in the making, but finally here. Really excited to put this in and share this with you guys. Let's do it. First part of disassembly, we want to go ahead and crack the slide, make sure the hammer's locked back. All right, now if you got a Kydex cheek rest like this, I highly recommend these. Go ahead and just peel it off. You can see what I've got underneath here, a lot of residue from some previous cheek rests that we were testing out and demoing. Now you can see here's the Kydex cheek rest, fantastic, easy to remove, great protection for the face since this is steel. Now we're gonna go ahead and separate the lower from the upper. There's just two takedown pins right here. You just push them right out, all right? They slide out effortlessly, and they're universal, so you don't have to worry about them getting mixed up. They're exactly the same. All right, go ahead and set those aside. Separating the lower from here is real simple. It actually locates up front here. You can see under the steel tab. All right, so it's plastic under steel, so just be mindful of that. The rest of it's really straightforward. It's actually simpler if you just give it a little tap like that, and it just comes up from the rear like this. It comes right up, forward, and you pull it back out. Now we can go ahead and move the upper aside and focus on the lower from this point forward. First thing we're going to do in separating this lower is actually tap out this pin on the slide lock button here. That's got to be removed before we can do anything else. And it's a nice idea to do it before we start separating screws. You don't want to have all the screws out and start hammering on this thing. So now go ahead and take my 1/16 inch punch. I'm going to line it up on the bench block like so, and I'm going to tap it right out. Alright, it's clean through. I like using that little notch right there, it's handy. Alright, now the slide lock button is going to come right off. Pin's still kind of captured in there. We've actually got an idea to make another one of these here shortly. It's going to be aluminum. Thinking about extending it as well. Interested to hear your feedback on that if you guys want to see something like this in the future. Go ahead and set the slide lock button aside with the pin. Won't need that. Alright, now we're going to focus on the rest of these screws here. You see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right here on the pistol grip frame that are exactly the same. Then we've got 2 back here that are actually going to be different size. This will be your medium length screw and this is your much longer screw. You'll see that here in a second. But we're going to start with the pistol grip, get all these out first. It's going to take a second, but if you've got one of these T-handle wrenches, really makes a world of difference. We're just going to start from the front and work our way back. Now there's something I want to caution you about. Right here is your action bar, all right? And that's what controls the actual slide, okay? So your action bar has got a spring under it, and this spring will go the distance, I'm telling you. I'm speaking from experience, so be very careful. We actually lost one first time we took this apart. It was just took forever to find. So yeah, if you do need to get one, KEL-TEC's got them, but you would have to wait, obviously. So 2.5 millimeter, I'm gonna start now. Really love this T-handle because it's got this flywheel motion. Boom, done. All right, now, you'll see these screws are all the same size. There's your short ones. If the nut comes out the back, that's fine. All right, set it aside. If it stays in the actual frame, go ahead and leave it there. No big deal. Alright, so I've got all 6 of these screws out here on the pistol grip. 2, 4, 5, 6. I've got all 6 of those out. Just be careful, keep an eye on this. Don't let the grip separate completely just yet. Alright, now I'm going to get these 2 back here. This will be your medium length. This is going to be your really long one right here. Alright, there's your medium length screw. Set that aside. Here's the longest screw. All right, now be careful. Do not let that frame separate on you. All right, it'll stay together fairly well just as long as you're not, really torquing on it. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and set that aside. I want to show you all the screws here. Here's all 8 screws that'll hold that lower together on your KSG. All right, you can see 6 of them here are exactly the same. And there's one that's medium length and there's one that's really long. Okay, so the 6 short ones are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right there in that pistol grip frame. All right, then your medium one's going to go right here, and then your long one's going to go back here. Now I will recommend using some blue 242 Loctite for these screws upon reassembly. Also going to recommend using this on the trigger itself for that pre-travel set screw. So let's get on into it. Let's go ahead and separate these halves now on the lower assembly. All right, now before we separate the lower, let's go ahead and pull on the trigger so that we can release this hammer forward. All right, good. That's pre-staged. It'll take a lot of the tension off of the components here and make life a lot easier. Less likely for things to just fly away on us. Now, be mindful, this action bar spring, okay, this is your action bar here. That's what we just removed earlier, that action bar lock button, okay? Now you've got your actual action bar here and that spring underneath, and that one will fly away on you. I'm speaking from personal experience. So go ahead and start separating the front of the lower here. And what you want to do is go ahead and grab that spring, okay? I just took the 1/16 inch punch and just dropped it right in between the center of the coils there. And I'm going to position it, I'm going to push it over to the left side here of the lower. And then I'm going to start separating the rest of it. Now this is a good time, if you got a flashlight, take a look at some of this internal linkage here and how it all situates inside. All right, it's just a great way to help get a good understanding of what you're about to do here in a minute. We're going to take it all apart, then put it back together. But at least we've got this video here as reference, but you know, you'll be able to look at it yourself as you're going through it. It's pretty straightforward. You know, it's not bad. Okay, so you can see I'm holding it there. You see I got all the linkage. I kind of evenly started separating everything back here. That's what you'll have to do. And then, as gently as possible, pull that cover off. And I'm going to push that safety through. I'm pulling the right side of the lower off. That's what I would recommend. There it goes. All right, big mess. You can see this right side here. I'm going to set it aside. And then you can see what was the trigger assembly here. The good thing is it's not that complicated. As you can see here, here's the trigger mechanism, and there's also a component that goes with it. This is the safety snap. That's actually what it's called. That's going to go ahead and situate on this big long leg of the spring here, just like that. All right. So this little assembly, I'm going to set aside just for this second as we talk about the rest of it here. All right. So here's your action bar and your action bar spring, the way it sits, right, just like that. We can go ahead and set this aside as well. I'm going to go ahead and put this pin right here. So the action bar hinge pin, I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to set this action bar and spring aside. And then you can see your safety. All right, set that aside. And then you can see your hammer. Now there's a hammer hinge pin here. I'm going to go ahead and leave that in the actual lower. So I'm going to put it back here in that slot that it was sitting in, right here. All right, not to be confused with these other two holes back here, but the hammer hinge pin sits there, all right? And now I've got the hammer assembly here. So I've got the hammer, right? And then I got these two hammer bars and the hammer springs here. Don't bother messing with these hammer springs. You're gonna save yourself a lot of trouble if you just leave it alone. It takes equal tension to get this thing captured like this. Trust me, I know, I've taken them off. It is a pain. I wouldn't recommend it. It'll make it a lot longer. So we're gonna go ahead and just leave it like this for now. But you can see this is where the sear is actually captured right here. All right, so we're gonna polish that up a little bit with some synthetic grease before we put the rest of this back together. If you did have a polishing kit, you could do that. You could do a little light polishing there if you wanted to. We're not gonna do it. Synthetic grease and the spring should be just more than enough. But if you wanted to get that little extra, real quickly, this is how the sear would locate right here, okay? That's it. And you can see how it would ride up like that. And this is what releases that hammer, okay? So those two engagement surfaces there, if you wanted to polish a little bit, you could, but we're just gonna put synthetic grease right here just to do it field expedient method. But if you want to take the extra time to do a little polishing, you already have a kit, there you go. All right, so we're gonna set all these components aside, and then we're gonna focus on this trigger now. All right, now here's the trigger, and this is a really cool design because it actually encompasses the sear as well, as you can see here. So we're gonna take it apart, we're gonna name each thing as it comes off. This is the safety snap, and you'll see how it locates here on this long leg of the trigger return spring. All right, so just something to take notice of and remember. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pull that off. Then you've got your trigger return spring here. All right, now we're going to replace that with the MCARBO trigger return spring, and we're actually going to replace this trigger. This is more for kind of FYI purposes, but in the process of doing this, we're actually going to go ahead and quickly reassemble the new trigger while we're at it. So factory trigger, new trigger. All right, really excited about this one. This is machined aluminum, aircraft grade 6061, a fantastic, phenomenal improvement. You can see we actually put the necessary geometry on there to hold the actual trigger return spring in the proper direction and format so that it functions properly in the firearm. All right, so we came up with our own feature here. You don't necessarily need this little talons on each side. You've got just one simple section that'll hold it in place perfectly. Now what we're going to do, take this 2.5mm Allen key or T-handle, and we're going to back off this set screw. It should be threaded all the way in, and we do that to check the threads. So backing it off. All right. Then we'll use the blue 242 Loctite on these threads here during the final assembly. Once we're adjusting the pre-travel, get it good and tight where we want it. And then that blue 242, it is removable, so in the future if you needed to do any adjustments you can, but it'll do the job keeping it from vibrating loose. All right, so let's go ahead and do this swap while we're at it. So now we're going to take this pin, all right, the trigger hinge pin, pull it right out, put some pressure on that sear, all right? And you'll see here how that sear functions and operates, okay? We want to replicate that. So we're going to put some pressure on that sear, pull this hinge pin all the way out, all right? Hinge pin is out. Now we're going to go ahead and back out the Sear, all right? Making sure that we're inspecting and looking at everything as we're doing it. There's a Sear spring right there, and the Sear spring guide is right behind it. So I'm going to set the Sear down in the orientation that we're going to be installing it, all right? Get this little spring out. All right, so I've got the Sear spring here with the Sear spring guide on the inside there, and you can see there's a little hole there at the top of this trigger where it's captured. All right, we're going to do the same thing in the new trigger. And then there's the factory trigger return spring, which we won't need. We're going to set that aside with the plastic trigger, which we won't need as well. All right, so here is the factory Sear spring, okay? What we're going to have to do is punch out that little guide, because we do want to take that over to the new trigger. But the factory Sear spring we can put aside. We don't need that. All right. There's the guide. Clean it off a little bit. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and grab the MCARBO trigger spring kit. All right. Go ahead and open this up. Alright, so here's the MCARBO spring kit here. So we've got a replacement trigger return spring and a replacement Sear spring. Alright, lighter springs, going to give us a nice even trigger pull reduction. Okay, this is great. I'm excited about this combined effect. It's nice to be able to do both at once. You're going to get that night and day experience rather than doing one at a time and kind of trying to notice the results. It's more or less that really awesome feeling when you can put something in, you see that total overhaul, right, from that heavy 7-pound trigger. I'm going to take some synthetic grease with PTFE and I'm going to go ahead and coat that Sear spring there. I'm going to grab my Sear spring guide and stick it in there. Really helpful just to keep it all together during the assembly. Now take the trigger, and you'll notice on the MCARBO trigger we also replicated that pocket. So go ahead and drop your Sear spring and guide into that pocket on the MCARBO trigger. Alright, push it down in. Good. Should be standing upright, just like that. Okay. Now we need to put the Sear in and compress it, and then get that pin to go in right behind it. It's a good idea to go ahead and take some of that synthetic grease with PTFE and coat the Sear. I'm going to set the trigger down just like that, keeping the spring upright. Now I'm going to coat the Sear real quick. We just want to improve the overall function, performance, especially right out the gate, especially on this feature right here where it's going to be locating on that Sear bar, where that engagement surface is going to be improved. It's going to help reduce that trigger pull, feel a lot cleaner and smoother. And I just like to have some nice, good, functioning internal parts. So it's not always that you're going to pull it apart to this degree, so it's nice to have it nice and lubricated. Synthetic grease, PTFE, fantastic stuff. Really love it. Now we're going to take the Sear and the new trigger. All right, make sure your spring is in there lined up. Okay, it's in the pocket. Now we're going to slide that Sear underneath that spring and then get it captured right there. Okay, you can see how it's captured. Now we're going to push it in, and what we're going to do is just take the index finger, hold it in place, grab your Sear hinge pin, and go ahead and put it in here underneath. All right, it's in one of the openings on the trigger underneath, and then you're going to push down. Really makes it simple. I really like that. Pushing down, lining it up, makes it really fast and easy to do that. All right, so we've got, boom, we've got that replicated function. And that's a good way to look at it. When you're taking this apart, you want to replicate the function. So look at that. We've got that Sear, all right, moving, and it's moving a lot easier now. Feels good. All right, that is beautiful. Man, I can't wait to get this in. I can't wait to see what kind of trigger pull reduction we get. Not to mention the feel. Right? It's going to be nice and even, smooth. It's going to feel like a real trigger. Now go ahead and grab your lighter MCARBO trigger return spring. You'll notice there's this little dip right here. Okay, you want that little lower portion of the spring to be down. Okay, and then you want this little leg here that's coming up off the top of that circular bend. All right, that'll be on this side here, where it's got that little raised locating feature there on this side, the right side of the trigger. That's the spring leg that you want, all right, that's coming off the top of that bend. And then you'll notice on the other side there's that lower leg, all right, that's coming up from the bottom. That's how it's going to go. So Putting it on, it's really easy. You're going to go ahead and just push down on the pin. All right. Then you're going to put one side on, that little eyelet, and then you're going to drop that lower portion under. You see that? Under the feature. Now we're going to push that pin through, okay? And that's going to allow us to drop that other side of the spring in place, and now we've got it located perfectly. Look at that. Nice. Okay, then we're going to take our safety snap. All right, this is what's actually grabbing those notches on the safety. And drop our safety snap just like that. All right, you'll see that long leg is what locates in that channel on the safety snap. I'm going to push a little bit of that pin through so we're good and captured there, nice and even. Nice. Man, we are ready. Look at that. We are ready to put this in. Pretty simple and straightforward. I mean, we've already got the trigger and the sear assembled, which is great. Now the rest is downhill. Let's go ahead and put this baby in. Now, before we install the trigger into this lower, I highly recommend grabbing a piece of duct tape and pulling back on the hammer and just taping it down. This will do a couple things. A, it's going to ensure that the hammer stays where it's supposed to be, and it's also going to help us during the installation get the best possible alignment. You can see there that it's under quite a bit of tension. And to hold that while you're putting the trigger in, trust me, it's a pain in the neck. So it's easiest just to put a piece of tape. We're holding tension now on the hammer. It's opening up a nice little pocket here for us to install this trigger. All right, now that we got the hammer locked back under tension, we're gonna do a couple things to make life a little easier on this installation. Now this safety snap, we're gonna go ahead and remove it just for a second. We're gonna install that at the end. Now this action bar hinge pin, we're gonna pull that out as well. Give us a little clearance. All right, so let's talk about this quickly. This leg right here, all right, which is on the opposite side of this locating feature, right? So it's going to be the first part of the trigger we push down into place. The short leg is going to capture right here in this pocket on the inside of this hinge pin wall. We're going to get that tension located right there, just like that, okay? We're going to lead in with that leg of the spring and grab it. And you can see it'll start to make things a little bit more difficult. Now what you want to do is get this leg of the sear to locate in here underneath the safety. It's going to drop right into that sear linkage right there. You see that little channel? Okay, it's going in right there. See that? Okay, now we're going to push in on the hinge pin. So we're lined up. The sear is locating on that sear bar. I'm pushing in the hinge pin. All right, we've got appropriate tension everywhere. You can see that little leg of the spring is kind of moving around. That's where the safety snap is going to go, so we're not too worried about that just yet. Mostly concerned with getting the sear to locate right there on that sear bar, which it has. I mean, that's exactly what we want right there. Okay, and that's where we're going to put a little bit of PTFE. All right, I'm going to take some of the synthetic grease of PTFE and just drop a little bit in there. All right. I've got my punch here handy, just kind of work it around. Okay, good. Now, what we're going to do is make sure everything's lined up perfectly. All right, now we're going to take our safety snap and drop that right in place. So get it on top of the hinge pin, then grab your punch and pull back on that leg of the spring. All right. Okay, now I push through on the safety, and that's what caught it right there. Now I had that index finger on top as well. All right, this is a really great spot to be. So we've got our sear locating on the sear bar here, as you can see. They're mated up, flush, nice. All right. We've got our actual safety snap locating in one of the two notches here. Fantastic. We've got the other leg of the trigger return spring locating here on the outer housing of where the action bar hinge pin goes. We'll go ahead and drop that action bar hinge pin in now. Fantastic. This is a great spot to be right here. Now let's proceed. Now we can go ahead and remove the tape here on the hammer. Just be careful not to disturb any of the linkage up here. It's all held under tension. So pushing down on that hammer, all right, it'll help assist with this process. And then peel off the tape. Hopefully you didn't tape it up too crazy. Alright, and just be careful now. As we're getting this tape off, try to keep some good tension on it. I think I taped it up too crazy. There it is. Alright, now, without disturbing any of the linkage, remember it's all under tension here, make sure this trigger bar is in the appropriate channel. Alright, sometimes it'll want to pop out on you, but we're slowly releasing the trigger forward. Put my fingers up here on some of the linkage. Alright, perfect. And the most important thing is that Sear bar and Sear that's on the trigger, that engagement, that surface, you do not want it to pop out. Alright, if the little safety snap pops out, no big deal. You just don't want this Sear to come unhinged here. Then you have to do that whole section again. So most importantly, it's all still there, captured under tension. Now we need to put the rest of it back together. So let's go ahead and adjust our pre-travel now on this new trigger. Now we'll take our blue 242 Loctite, put a little dab on the threads here. Alright. Now the whole idea here is we're going to tighten up this set screw till it touches the tip of that Sear there, and that's going to tighten up all the pre-travel, which is fantastic. Alright, so we're going to take our 2.5mm Allen key, or I'm using that T-handle wrench, and I'm going to tighten up that set screw, and we've got that window cut out so we can see it when it starts to engage. And this is when it may be handy to have your flashlight, but you can see it now. It's engaging that tip of the Sear there. Alright, so you want it to just be flush with it. It doesn't need to be super tight against it, just until it touches the tip of that Sear. So we've got the set screw and the tip of the Sear touching. I'm going to wipe off a little excess of that blue 242 that came out. Alright, which is removable Loctite. It'll do its job there, keep it from vibrating loose. Alright, so what we can do to test it now is we can go ahead and pull back on our hammer. Alright, just be careful not to disturb the linkage. Alright, hammer's locked back now. And it's already on fire. So I'm going to pull the trigger slightly just to test. I'm keeping an eye on that Sear tab back here. Oh yeah, it's pulling on it. Yeah, there's no pre-travel. Look at that. You know, and that's the thing. So pre-travel is when you're pulling on the trigger and it's not engaging with anything. It's just free movement. There's nothing there. But you can see when I pull on this trigger, it actually wants to drop. You can see it's pulling up on that Sear. Now that your pre-travel's been adjusted, your hammer stage forward, we're going to go ahead and drop our action bar and action bar spring into place. Take your action bar and action bar spring and go ahead and get to locate on that hinge pin, the action bar hinge pin right there. So get the hole to locate and then get the spring to compress and push both down at the same time and get it to actually hold in place right there on the polymer. Fantastic. Now let's put the other half of the lower assembly back together. Alright, so now we're getting ready to put the other side of this lower assembly back on, but just make sure all of these pins are fully seated. You can take the back side of your punch and just push down on all these pins. Make sure they're fully seated. Alright. Good. Now it's 4 pins. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 that have to actually locate on the other side of this assembly, and then also the safety. So there's 5 things essentially that are going to have to locate here. So we're going to drop the other side of the assembly over top of that safety first, and then get that rear hinge pin, the hammer hinge pin back here. I want to get that to locate first because it is longer, and that'll be easier to grab. And that'll be about as far as you can get unless you got some really good initial alignment, and if you do, nice job. Alright, that went together real easy because the initial alignment was pretty straightforward. That is not the case always. So I'm just going to demonstrate then. Alright, I'm going to create some problems for myself here. Take the small punch and just move this action bar and spring over so we can demo this. And be careful, that little action bar and spring definitely likes to give you trouble. Alright, so you can see actually that action bar spring just popped out. So if that happens, you're 90% there, you can take your flathead and just push it back in like that so you don't have to go back through the entire process. but just keep it, obviously, action bar to one side. I'm using my index finger up front here. That's actually where the lock button's going to be here in a second. I do want to point out you'll take your 3/32 inch punch and most likely have to make some adjustments manually. Specifically, that pin where the hammer spring is captured, all right? And it's that forward pin that most of the time doesn't like to cooperate, and you'll have to push it forward, all right, to get it to locate into that notch on the assembly. Other than that, though, you know, it's 4 pins like we just discussed. One back here for the hammer hinge pin, then there's that hammer spring pin here, and then there's the action bar linkage pin here, and then the actual trigger pin here. So 4 pins. And it went together really nicely initially there. You could see how that initial prep to make sure the pins were straight really worked out. And here it is. So it's coming together again a little bit slowly. Here's a problem that you can see is fairly common. This hammer linkage is outside of its little recess, all right, and it's pushing against the polymer. And I've got this gap here, so now I just push down on it. Take the punch and just push down. There it is, okay? Now it's back in its little recess, and we're back in business here, all right? Now it's not completely seated. I'm still having a little bit of an issue here. There, pulling the hammer back, put the rest of it back into alignment. So if you have to, move the safety, lock the hammer back. You know, this is all under tension alignment initially. So trying to get these 2 halves to mate up appropriately is key, and obviously is going to be the biggest hurdle, but not impossible and not nearly that difficult once you understand the process. If you go at this kind of with brute force, it's going to be a frustrating task, but if you go at this systematically thinking about it and how it all interacts with one another, that'll be the best way to attack it. So now let's go ahead and put the screws back in, and then we can put the actual lock button back in up front here. All right, now we're going to start putting our grip screws back in. Just take notice there's 2 that are longer than the others. All right, so there's 8 screws altogether. Then there's 2 that are a little bit longer, one really long and one medium. All right, we'll put those to the side just for this second. The rest of these 6 small screws, we're going to go ahead and install those now. Now we're going to insert the first screw right here underneath the trigger guard. All right, that's important because it's going to hold everything together. You can see everything is alignment and tension, so we don't want it to start separating on us and have to repeat the process again. All right, you can put these screws and nuts on either side. I'm trying to get my finger on that nut there so that I can actually take the 2.5mm T-wrench and tighten it up real quick. This is the most important screw because it's the first one, and that's why we decided to go right underneath the trigger. It'll put a good amount of tension right in that important area, and as you can see, the next one's going to go up front here to keep that action bar spring captured. All right, next one's going right up front, right there. Got my finger on it. Now I'm going to drop the nut on the other side. Keep a finger on that, keep tension on it. Take my T-handle wrench and tighten it right up. Once we get these 2 in place, the rest is pretty easy. You don't have to worry about the tension as much, but definitely get them good and snugged up. You don't want to have any problems right here. Alright, now we're going to take the next one, put it right up here, up top. That way there we're covered. Boom, boom, boom. We've got this whole trigger mechanism covered with tension, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to leave it any opportunity to make its own decisions here. Alright, so there's that nut. It's already located inside. Now these have a recess. Take your punch and just push it, all right, down on the table. Tighten it right up. Now if you don't have those punches or this T-handle wrench, we sell all this stuff, so you can grab it as you're grabbing these parts. All right, there we go. Now we can rest assured everything is at least going to hold itself together. We don't have to worry too much about losing any of our location on any of these parts. Now we can put the rest of them back together. All right, now we can keep going with these short screws. We'll keep inserting them, you know, one at a time. We just don't have to stress as much about that tension. I've already got one of the nuts back there, so tighten it up. All right, I'm going to leave these 2 for last. I'm going to grab that medium screw, all right, and drop it right in here where it says KSG patent pending. Okay? Dropping that right in. Drop the other nut right behind it there. Now we're going to tighten it up. Good and snug. Now I'm going to take the longest one and drop that in the back here. Get it good and snug. Alright. Now those last two pistol grip screws. Alright, last screw. 8 screws all together. Alright, good to go. Alright, now let's go ahead and take your lock button and get it to locate there on that tab on the action bar. Alright, it's going to be captured just like that. It's a nice good little interference fit. Then take your pin, alright, and put it on the other side, and then press down on your bench block. Wiggle that lock button a little bit until you feel it start to feed through. Alright, once it gets started, then we can flip it around. Give it a couple good taps. See it going in there. Alright, now that's pretty much flush right there, but if you needed to, you could take your punch and give it a couple other taps from either side, but we are good to go right there. Now grab your upper, turn it upright, then grab your lower, make sure the hammer's locked back. We're going to insert this tab here into this little channel up here. This tab is going to go into this channel first. Alright, we're going to do that. Now the rest of it, with that hammer locked back, you see that hammer is going to slide right into that notch in the back here. See that? It slides right in like so. Alright, and then push straight down. Good. Now it's a matter of the holes being lined up. And if they're lined up, those pins will drop right in. So go ahead and do so. Good to go. Look at that. Awesome. Then if you got the Kydex cover, snap that back on into place. We are good to go. Now look at that. There's absolutely zero pre-travel. It is all solid engagement the entire time I'm pulling on the trigger there. Phenomenal. Alright, let's go ahead and do a quick function check. It's on safe, pull the trigger, nothing. It's on fire, pull the trigger. Man, that is fantastic. Let's measure this trigger pull. Alright, now let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. 3 pounds, 6.3 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 3 pounds, 3 ounces. 3 pounds, 2.9 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. 50% trigger pull reduction for your KSG shotgun. Really can't beat that. Phenomenal. From 7 pounds down to 3.5 pounds. Really fantastic. Not to mention, too, the pre-travel adjustment is second to none. Really can't beat that. And you really can't imagine going back to all that pre-travel and the way that trigger felt before. It is just so much cleaner and so much more effective. It's not so much that it's a nice, real light trigger. It's more that it's a smooth, crisp, solid trigger pull. No longer is it a pull the trigger, hope it might go off, I'm not sure when, lots of pre-travel. Now it's much cleaner, crisper, more precise, and deliberate. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, for your ideas and your support, and as always, happy shooting.